In a scene in Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory, 3 soldiers are sentenced to execution. The reasons why are irrelevant. They have been randomly chosen as fall guys for the system.
Help, man, race.
There's something symbolic about this in Kubrick's films. Human beings are small and helpless, born into a world clueless, with only a limited sense of reason to cling to. The large, unknown, random forces of chaos dictate our lives and societies. As the line in King Lear goes, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport.
Aim! Fire!
Kubrick is not my favorite filmmaker. There's something cold and disturbingly anti-human about his films.
I've got a bad feeling about him.
You do?
Yeah, definitely. Don't you?
Even though I'm drawn in by his brilliant images, radiant with intelligence, they also repel me.
Stop it, please! I beg you! It's a sin! It's a sin! It's a sin! It's a sin!
I'm not alone in feeling this way. The critic David Thompson wrote, Kubrick knew too much about film and too little about life, and it shows. While Pauline Kael wrote of 2001, it isn't accidental that we don't care if the characters live or die. If Kubrick has made his people so uninteresting, it is partly because characters and individual fates just aren't big enough for certain kinds of big movie directors. Kael even goes on to hint that Stanley with 2001 had become what he satirized in Dr. Strangelove, a megalomaniac in love with the creative destruction of violence, which he considered almost a fascistic invocation of social Darwinism. The film starts with apes learning how to use violence as a civilizing tool, and with that famous jump cut it transports us hundreds of thousands of years into the future, where the same violence has expanded the human frontier into space. The film ends with a Nietzschean star child reborn, just as it conquered the machine intelligence of HAL, and Ubermensch for the space age. The choice of music is also intriguing. The Richard Strauss tone poem Thus Spake Zarathustra has allusions to Nazi Germany all over. Not only is the composer Strauss deeply implicated in at least passive public support for Hitler, the conductor of the recording used by Kubrick, Herbert von Karajan, was a member of the Austrian Nazi Party. The music has fascist fingerprints all over it. The Jewish Stanley Kubrick, well read in Nazi history, surely must have been aware of this. I don't want to suggest that artists aren't allowed to make disturbing, complicated art. The lengths Kubrick is willing to push the thesis of 2001 is what makes the film so fascinating. It's almost a piece of societal critique. The price of civilization is increased barbarism. But the film heralds a tendency in Kubrick that will only make his films worse as his individual total control of all parts of filmmaking became stronger. I don't particularly like A Clockwork Orange, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, or Eyes Wide Shut.
You little scumbag! I got your name! I got your ass!
Don't get me wrong. Kubrick's brilliance would shine through in all of these films, like flashes of inspired modern myth-making. But the sum total is empty. Barry Lyndon is probably the best one of his later works, a strange picaresque set in the early 19th century. The early Kubrick, before 2001, is where he made his best work for me. The Killing, which is Kubrick's first really good movie, is a deft if flawed film noir. It has some brilliant performances and scenes, especially from Sterling Hayden and Mary Windsor, who creates one of film history's sexiest evil femme fatales.
Tell me something, would you, Sherry? Just tell me one thing. Why did you ever marry me anyway?
Oh, George, when a man has to ask his wife that, well, he just hadn't met her, that's all.
Lolita is my favorite. A strange and disturbing film which flips Nabokov's book completely, making Hubert Humphrey into a strangely sympathetic spurned lover. Here Kubrick harnesses his love for classical filmmaking to his eccentric intelligence, while not letting it run rampant. The Kubrick film scholar James Naremore locates Stanley Kubrick's film style in classic modernism, like Kafka or Beckett in literature. It's a style that had grown tired of realism and sentimentalism, which seemed naive and wrong-headed. Instead, it opts for alienation. The acting in Kubrick films is rarely realistic or aiming for emotion. It's over the top or strange, uncanny. The camera work is floating with strange, slow dolly shots, wide angles which distort the features. One of Kubrick's favorite directors was Max Ophuls, and you can see his influence in the godlike camera, always moving around in long takes, never really entering into the characters, but rather observing them coldly. The effect of all this is, once again, coldness and objectivity, where human beings are reduced to geometrical patterns in a cold, abstract universe. Perhaps this is why Kubrick had such a fascination with mannequins and dolls, the human being as artificial material. Dr. Strangelove is probably his most perfect film, a black comedy where Kubrick dismantles the bizarre logic of modern rationality. But it's also a showcase in the limits of his vision. Kubrick, an avid and keen chess player, was aware of the influential field of game theory. It's a technical field claiming to study human behavior under certain narrow parameters. How do human beings act and make choices when the rules are known and there are clear win and lose situations? It's called game theory for a reason. Human beings play games, but that's not all we do. In most situations in life, there are no clear wins and losses, and outcomes are far too unpredictable and uncertain. The film illustrates what's known as Murphy's Law, or otherwise known by the simple formula, if something can go wrong, it will. During the Cold War, Murphy's Law seemed to envision the inevitable end of the world through nuclear conflict. After all, the more complex a system is, the more likely it is that something will go wrong. Given that the weapon systems piling up thousands of nuclear warheads scattered all through the world were extremely complex, why didn't something go wrong during all those decades? And this is why I say that Dr. Strangelove can point us to the limits of Kubrick's vision. The lack of human agency. What stopped nuclear catastrophe was the actions of human beings, like the Soviet Navy officer Vasily Arkhipov, who kept his head cool and refused to fire a nuclear torpedo during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because Kubrick is so interested in the powerlessness of humans, trapped in a large system of control, he's somewhat uninterested in the agency of character. This is what makes his films unique, but it's also what makes them somewhat unsatisfying for me. Dr. Strangelove ends, as it must, with the entire world being blown up. Thankfully, in our world, our actions can make a difference. The system is human-made and not all-powerful. That's why nuclear destruction hasn't happened.
Hey, what about Major Kong?
Yet.